You are not unseen because you are weak. You are unseen because you are interchangeable. That silent dread you feel, the one that whispers late at night when the texts stop coming and the emails dry up, that's not the fear of failure. It is the fear of irrelevance, the cold realization that if you vanished tomorrow, the world would only pause for a commercial break before finding your replacement already warmed up and waiting in the wings. We live in the age of total visibility, where every meal, thought, and outrage is broadcast into the digital abyss, yet we are simultaneously suffering from an epidemic of profound, paralyzing invisibility. The paradox of the modern condition is this: the more information we share, the less presence we command. We are all streaming live, but nobody is watching the feed. This is not a failure of branding, it is a failure of being. The epidemic of the invisible man is not a disease of the obscure, but a consequence of mass self-domestication. We have been taught, subtly and brutally, that the safest place to stand is precisely where everyone else is standing. We mistake conformity for security, believing that if we match the prevailing aesthetic, moral, and professional color palette, we will earn protection. What we earn instead is camouflage. We become perfect background noise. Society does not erase the aggressively different. It simply ignores the pleasantly compliant. We have become masters of the safe expression, the lukewarm opinion, the uncontroversial career path, the personality structured entirely around avoiding conflict. You see, true visibility, the kind that shifts conversations, breaks patterns, and leaves indelible marks, is fundamentally risky. It requires friction. It demands that you stand on a ground that is uniquely yours, even if that ground is unstable or unpopular. But we have chemically engineered the friction out of our lives, smoothing out every sharp edge until we present a perfectly polished, perfectly featureless unit ready for consumption. We chose optimization over authenticity, and optimization always prioritizes efficiency over singularity. When you optimize yourself to fit, you optimize yourself to disappear. You become a statistic, not a singularity. If you find yourself nodding, recognizing the profound emptiness behind the endless scroll and the forced smiles, then you are ready to dig deeper than the surface psychology. If you are tired of the shallow answers and ready to stare directly into the mechanics of self-erasure, hit that subscribe button now and join the few who are willing to stop being polite and start being present. The greatest conspiracy against your presence is not malicious, it is statistical. It is the tyranny of the average. Every system, educational, corporate, governmental, is engineered to manage the vast middle. It rewards behavior that is predictable, scalable, and low maintenance. They don't want your disruptive genius. They want your reliable output. They don't want your profound insight. They want your quarterly report formatted correctly. When you willingly place yourself in the vast middle, you gain institutional security, but you forfeit personal sovereignty. You trade your signal for silence. We developed the perfect disguise, the mask of competence that hides a core of crippling, unearned similarity. We mastered the art of seeming engaged while being psychologically absent, creating a vast, hollow middle class of people who are too busy performing life to actually live it. This performance, designed for maximum acceptance, achieves minimum impact. The world doesn't hate the invisible man, it just doesn't know he's there. And in the modern world, not knowing you are there is a far more effective form of annihilation than active hostility. Hostility, at least, grants you the dignity of being recognized as a threat. Invisibility grants you nothing but space to fade. This self-annihilation isn't accidental. It's a perfectly rational psychological defense against the searing heat of genuine exposure. The pain of the vast middle is a dull, chronic ache, the low-grade misery of alienation, but it is preferable to the acute, terrifying pain of being truly seen and potentially rejected. We prefer the quiet despair of the invisible man, because visibility requires integrity, and integrity is a high-risk investment. It demands that you match your internal blueprint with your external action, a process so brutally honest that most people flee back to the sanctuary of the generic. The suffering generated by this compromise is the agonizing friction between the person you were engineered to be and the singular potential you refuse to activate. This internal civil war is exhausting. We spend more energy maintaining the disguise, the veneer of seamless competence, than we ever would on authentic creation. We become the greatest actors in the world, performing a life that we believe satisfies the audience of our peers and institutions, but the actor is starving backstage. The tragedy is that we never realize the audience is equally exhausted, equally masked, and equally uninterested in the authenticity they claim to crave. They merely want proof that their own decision to conform was justified. So we offer that proof day after day, polishing our chains until they look like trophies. What fuels this engine of internal sabotage is a lie of temporal deferral. The belief that this temporary erasure is necessary, a strategic retreat before the grand future reveal. We tell ourselves that once the promotion is secured, once the mortgage is paid, once we reach some arbitrary, societally approved milestone, then we will finally retrieve the discarded self and live authentically. But that moment never arrives because the muscle required for authenticity atrophies from disuse. The self you deferred becomes the self you destroyed. You are left not with security, but with a vast, engineered loneliness. This loneliness is the unique affliction of the optimized human, surrounded by millions of equally optimized, equally featureless units, yet feeling utterly isolated because the connection is based on shared performance, not shared reality. We are connected by our masks, and the masks cannot truly touch. This is why we seek distraction, why the scroll never ends, why the endless purchasing cycle feels mandatory. We are attempting to fill the void created by the absence of our own presence, replacing psychological depth with material accumulation, trading meaning for momentary dopamine hits. If you feel this absence gnawing at your attention, if you want more than surface-level analysis of the human condition and are committed to supporting content that digs into the shadow mechanics of the modern mind, consider hitting the like button on this video and subscribing. It's the only metric that guarantees deep philosophical analysis continues to be prioritized in a sea of algorithms designed for the fleeting and the facile. The true psychological burden of the vast middle is the realization that your decisions, your outputs, and even your suffering are interchangeable. You lack psychological gravity. Singular existence, by definition, exerts gravitational pull. It bends the space around it. Conformity, however, is a state of zero G. You float effortlessly, managed by the currents, contributing nothing unique to the mass of human experience. This weightlessness feels initially liberating, no responsibility for defining oneself, but eventually it becomes the ultimate horror, the lack of substance. You are not just invisible to others, you become progressively opaque to yourself. The internal dialogue, the voice that whispers your true desires, begins to sound foreign, then faint, and finally it goes silent entirely. When the voice of the true self is extinguished, the only remaining sound is the hum of the system waiting for your next compliant input. The system, having successfully managed your existence, now manages your demise. We chose the cage not because we misunderstood freedom, but because we fundamentally misjudged the structural integrity of our own soul. We believed we could survive the prolonged drought of authenticity, only to discover that the soul requires a continuous flow of congruence to survive. The system anticipated that need for congruence, that human requirement for ethical gravity, and provided a terrifyingly efficient substitute, the outsourced conscience. It understands that a compliant soul is not necessarily a quiet one. Sometimes, the most manageable input is synthetic rage. If the authentic self dies, the void is instantly filled by a prefabricated moral identity, spoon-fed through a continuous stream of curated grievances. This explains the relentless, frantic energy of the modern moral crusader who believes they are fighting the good fight, but who is in reality performing obedience to a highly specific, ever-shifting digital dogma. They are not allowed to define their own virtue. Instead, they are given a checklist of approved injustices to be righteously furious about this week. The outrage is not the result of personal, deeply felt ethical conviction. It is merely compliant input. Observe the sheer velocity of attention turnover in the digital sphere. A tragedy unfolds, genuine human suffering is catalogued, amplified, monetized, and then, within 2 news cycles, it is utterly replaced by the next, equally urgent, equally demanding moral imperative. The speed of the discard function proves that the participant was never truly invested in the cause, only in the role of the virtuous combatant. This cycling of synthetic empathy, this rapid-fire performance of moral triage, demonstrates the ultimate failure of psychological gravity. The user's compassion is not a deep wellspring. It is a shallow reservoir connected to 1,000 different pipes, designed to empty and refill instantly with whatever emotion the algorithm determines is trending. This is the horror of the interchangeable self made visible. Your suffering is not yours, your anger is not yours, and your virtue is certainly not earned. You are simply a vessel for the system's managed emotional inventory. The consequence of this perpetual outsourcing is devastating. By constantly wearing the standardized uniform of righteousness, by perpetually demonstrating that you belong to the correct tribe, you eliminate any necessity for self-examination. Why delve into the uncomfortable complexity of your own flaws, your own hypocrisies, your own shadow, when the system has provided a universal scapegoat and a ready-made set of enemies whose flaws are always exponentially worse than your own? You are given instant moral elevation without the grueling work of authentic self-improvement. This is the genius of the vast machine. It co-opts the deepest human need, the need for meaning, and renders it safe, predictable, and profitable. It replaces personal transformation with public performance. This is why the world feels saturated with moral fervor, yet starved of genuine character. We are producing armies of perfectly articulated, highly reactive digital shadows who can identify injustice globally but remain utterly incapable of enacting discipline or dignity within their own 4 walls. They have traded the gravity of self-mastery for the effortless weightlessness of performative advocacy. We have become experts at policing the external world precisely because we have abandoned the impossible task of governing the internal one. The resulting fragility of the modern mind is a direct function of this moral outsourcing. When genuine, unmediated reality inevitably strikes, a crisis, a personal betrayal, a confrontation with a painful truth that cannot be solved by a 5-minute Twitter rant, the system-managed soul collapses. It lacks the structural integrity necessary to absorb shock because it has never been required to bear its own weight. It has only ever been required to reflect the weight of the moment. This is the final verdict on the vast middle. It does not just neutralize greatness, it guarantees catastrophic fragility at the point of existential pressure. The lack of friction in the comfort zone has not led to resilience. It has cultivated an absolute, brittle inability to survive the necessary roughness of an authentic life. The system, having managed your inputs, is now perfecting the management of your inevitable, predictable, and interchangeable psychological breakdown. The system guarantees this psychological collapse, and it sells the cure before the disease has even manifested. And here is the great, comforting lie sold to the fractured modern soul: the belief that the highest aim of existence is the elimination of friction, the pursuit of guaranteed psychological safety. This lie is packaged as therapeutic wisdom, as self-care, yet it is nothing more than sophisticated spiritual armor designed not to protect you from existential threats, but to shield you from the very necessary experience of personal discomfort. We have pathologized normal suffering, reframing the inevitable challenges of being alive, grief, failure, rejection, cognitive dissonance, as traumas that must be excised rather than integrated. The modern mind is trained to view the world as a constant source of potential triggers, demanding that the external environment be sanitized and regulated to match the fragile interior state. But this is the fatal flaw in the therapeutic contract. You are demanding an impossible level of control over reality, and in doing so, you are actively forfeiting the only control that matters, the mastery over your own reaction. You are taught to manage the world, not the self. This is why a generation obsessed with the language of vulnerability has produced an unprecedented brittleness. They speak of strength through weakness, but mistake the articulation of pain for the actual process of healing and fortification. True strength is not the ability to eloquently describe your wounds. True strength is the structural capacity to absorb repeated damage and continue functioning. The quiet, unromantic fact of scar tissue. When you dedicate your life to avoiding every potential trigger, what you are actually doing is denying your nervous system the necessary calibration required for survival. You are cultivating a profound terror of reality itself. This analysis, this willingness to dive into the uncomfortable paradoxes of the contemporary mind, requires a certain dedication, not just from me, but from you, the listener. If you find this depth essential and refuse to settle for the soft, interchangeable narratives that dominate the mainstream, then take a moment, hit the subscribe button, and ensure you never miss these necessary, harsh confrontations with the truth. The vast middle hates this kind of specificity. It prefers generalized outrage to personalized introspection. The result of this safety obsession is predictable. We have produced citizens who are not merely unprepared for adversity, but who actively interpret adversity as evidence of systemic injustice against them personally. They weaponize their own discomfort. The pain of realizing you are wrong, the shame of a personal failure, the simple awkwardness of navigating complex social terrain. These are now read through the lens of victimhood, because if the world is supposed to be safe and frictionless, then any instance of friction must logically be an act of malice or oppression. This is the ultimate intellectual cowardice, to substitute psychological resilience for political lobbying, asking external institutions to bear the burden of your internal integration. The individual becomes a perpetual plaintiff against reality, demanding compensation for the sheer inconvenience of existence. This shift from responsibility to demand is the subtle psychological mechanism that keeps the vast middle spinning. It transforms every person into a low-grade crisis manager for their own feelings, perpetually scanning the horizon for slights, while completely ignoring the cavernous lack of character development happening internally. They confuse high emotional responsiveness with deep moral insight. It is a world built on instantaneous reaction, which is the perfect fuel for algorithms and the perfect sedative for the soul. The system doesn't need you to be strong. It needs you to be reactive and easily mobilized. They suffer from this because the alternative is ontological terror. The greatest fear of the contemporary individual is not death, but silence. If they stop scanning the perimeter for injustice, if they turn off the infinite scroll of generalized offense, they are left alone with the deafening quiet of their own unaddressed existence. What they find in that silence is not peace, but a cavernous, unearned vacuum. Character development is terrifying because it requires demolition, the destruction of comfortable, prefabricated identities inherited from culture or algorithm. To admit that the primary source of one's discontent is internal, that one's failure to thrive is a function of poorly managed energy and neglected introspection, is to forfeit the most valuable currency in the vast middle: blamelessness. The system understands this vulnerability perfectly. It knows that a person focused entirely on external grievance is a person who will never solve the actual problem, which is the internal poverty of spirit. Outrage is the cheapest form of belonging, and the modern world is designed to subsidize it indefinitely. We are watching the mass psychological migration from existential anxiety, the difficult, noble suffering of finding meaning in a meaningless universe, to political grievance, which is the lazy suffering of demanding that the universe conform to your preferred safety narrative. This confusion ensures that suffering does not cease. It merely metastasizes into a new bureaucratic form. The psychological infrastructure required to withstand this self-confrontation is enormous, and tragically, the cultural architecture has been stripped bare of meaningful supports for difficult, deep introspection. We live in the age of easy answers and instant emotional payouts, which means any content that genuinely insists on complexity, on the difficult work of character and self-authorship, must fight a violent, uphill battle against the inertia of superficiality. If you recognize the necessity of this fight, if you know that the easy narratives are poisoning the well of human potential, then stand with us. This kind of forensic, uncompromised analysis, the kind that cuts through the noise and demands personal accountability, cannot survive without support. Take a moment right now, hit the subscribe button, and ensure that content demanding depth is not drowned out by the endless, self-pitying static of the crowd. We are building the antidote to reactive living. This demand for systemic safety is, ironically, the greatest threat to genuine safety. It creates a population permanently stuck in a state of psychological latency, confusing the ability to react with the act of living. They mistake the highly specific, adrenaline-fueled satisfaction of correcting a perceived injustice on social media for the deep, slow-burn satisfaction of having built a life of durable meaning. This confusion breeds a peculiar kind of nihilism, one that is masked by fervent moralizing. Traditional nihilism said that nothing matters. The new therapeutic nihilism says that only feelings matter, and because feelings are fundamentally unstable and subjective, the entire external world must be policed to manage this internal volatility. They are not striving for freedom, they are striving for a perfect, hermetically sealed emotional bubble, and anyone who pricks that bubble is deemed an enemy of the state, or at least an enemy of their preferred self-image. This is why the arguments are never about facts, but always about impact and feeling. The analysis has to stop at the point of discomfort, because true analysis requires the subject to transcend their immediate emotional state, and that is precisely the work they have outsourced to the external world. The goal is not truth. The goal is managed feeling, and for that reason they will never be free. They are perfectly optimized for their own suffering. The ultimate transaction of the weak ego is trading genuine, hard-won self-esteem for the fleeting, socially validated status of being morally injured. They weaponize their fragility, their pain becomes currency, and the entire ecosystem is designed to reward the loudest, most compelling performance of victimhood. This is why the contemporary moral panic is so deeply intertwined with the digital panopticon. The highest status is conferred not upon those who overcome adversity, but upon those who most effectively broadcast their inability to tolerate it. The suffering is not something to be metabolized and transformed into resilience. It is a resource to be carefully maintained and deployed. If you solve your own problem, you lose your identity structure. If the system solves it for you, or more accurately, if the system punishes the perceived source of discomfort, your position of moral superiority is momentarily cemented. Consider the brutal reality of what happens when this optimized suffering meets complexity, specifically in the intellectual arena. Take the example of a tenured professor or a data analyst who presents statistical findings or philosophical arguments that violate the prevailing, emotionally managed narrative of the institution. They are not subjected to peer review or counter-argument based on methodology or logic. They are subjected to a moral inquisition. Their work is instantly translated from a proposition about the world, X causes Y, or Z policy is inefficient, into an act of violence against the feelings of the aggrieved community. The data, the evidence, the carefully structured logic, All of it is incinerated because the primary goal is not understanding reality, but defending the psychological integrity of the audience. They do not say, your study is flawed. They say, your study is harmful. Harm is the new intellectual metric, and because harm is defined exclusively by subjective, internal emotional response, the analysis must be stopped instantly. The professor is destroyed not because they were wrong, but because they caused a crack in the hermetic emotional seal. The institutional response to intellectual diversity is now functionally identical to a highly sensitive smoke alarm. Any heat of genuine disagreement, any friction of uncomfortable truth, triggers an automatic, system-wide shutdown designed solely to protect the feeling of safety, even if it means sacrificing truth itself. This is not scholarship. It is emotional maintenance disguised as social justice. The perverse brilliance of this system is that the people trapped within it sincerely believe they are the most courageous generation, yet they are definitionally unable to tolerate the foundational discomfort required for growth, be it physical, philosophical, or psychological. They have outsourced their courage to the crowd, mistaking the adrenaline rush of collective moral certainty for genuine inner fortitude. If this relentless, forensic dismantling of the superficial narratives that keep us small resonates with you, if you see the crucial need for analysis that refuses to bow to managed feeling, you must ensure this kind of content survives. Hit that subscribe button now and stand against the tide of easy, comforting lies. We are the architects of durable meaning, and we refuse to simplify the world merely to make people feel better about their inertia. The consequences of this optimized suffering extend far beyond the campus quad. They infiltrate personal relationships, transforming genuine intimacy, which necessarily involves vulnerability and the risk of disagreement, into a series of carefully negotiated contracts designed to prevent offense. The moment real conflict arises, the therapeutic nihilist doesn't engage. They retreat behind the language of trauma and boundaries, effectively using psychological terminology to shield themselves from the hard work of accountability and mutual compromise. They are unable to engage in the beautiful, messy negotiation of two sovereign consciousnesses meeting, because one consciousness has already decided that its subjective discomfort defines objective reality. They are attempting to colonize the psychological space of the other person, demanding that the partner become an agent of their self-regulation. This is not love, it is control, dressed up in the compassionate lexicon of therapy. And this, ultimately, is the trap. The person who demands a frictionless, perfectly managed emotional life is guaranteeing themselves a life of isolation, because reality is inherently abrasive. Freedom is messy. Growth is pain. The attempt to eliminate all suffering results only in a more profound, self-inflicted sterility. They have traded the possibility of profound joy, which always lies on the other side of great risk, for the guaranteed mediocrity of safety. They are not surviving life, they are merely managing their decline. The perfect optimization for suffering is achieved when the individual insists that the world must change before they do. And the world, being indifferent to their feelings, will simply leave them behind. The final verdict then must be a brutal one. The pursuit of emotional safety above all else is the ultimate act of self-betrayal. It is the voluntary abandonment of agency, the calculated surrender of sovereignty for the sake of a managed feeling. The greatest injustice we face today is not the external world's failure to perfectly protect us from discomfort, but our own relentless success at protecting ourselves from growth. We are trapped in a self-made purgatory of perfect, safe dissatisfaction. True resilience is built not by demanding a world without edges, but by sharpening ourselves against them. If you believe, as we do, that the path to a meaningful life requires confronting the difficult truths rather than escaping them, then join this intellectual community. Subscribe now and commit to the hard, necessary work of becoming dangerous to your own comfortable illusions. The illusion of emotional safety is the most elaborate and ultimately lethal trap humanity has ever devised. We trade the possibility of being truly alive, which is synonymous with being vulnerable, for the guarantee of being safely numb. The ultimate paradox is this: the moment you commit fully to avoiding tragedy, you guarantee a tragic life, because the deepest tragedy is the one you inflict upon yourself when you choose not to exist fully. The price of an emotionally optimized life is nothing less than the surrender of your fate to the tyranny of avoidance. If your priority is to feel good, you will never be great. If your goal is to manage your anxiety, you will never conquer your fears. True resilience is not the absence of pain, it is the absolute commitment to experiencing the world as it is, sharp, dangerous, magnificent, and entirely indifferent to your need for comfort. The philosophers who matter, the artists who changed the world, the thinkers who truly lived were never safe. They were volatile, contradictory, and deeply flawed. They accepted that to touch the sublime, you must risk the abyss. Your life is not a database to be managed. It is a fire to be tended. Stop regulating the heat. Let the flames burn, even if they sometimes scorch you, because that burning is the only proof that you are real and that you are present in your own existence. We must stop demanding the world be softer and instead demand of ourselves that we become harder, sharper, and more capable of standing in the blaze. That is the only authentic path towards self-possession. If you are one of the few who rejects the sedative of safety, who understands that the price of true consciousness is often discomfort, then you belong here. We are building a space for those who refuse to shrink their lives down to the size of their anxieties. Join this congregation of the dangerous, the curious, and the relentlessly honest. Subscribe now and let us face the uncomfortable fire together. The verdict on the modern pursuit of security, then, is not that it fails to deliver safety, it is that it succeeds in delivering a profound, sterile emptiness. We are not meant to be optimized machines. We are meant to be living, breathing contradictions defined by our capacity for both ecstatic joy and devastating sorrow. Stop trying to minimize the variance of your life. The deepest failure is not falling short of a goal. The deepest failure is the refusal to ever attempt a height that might actually break you. You will never find freedom in the small spaces you carve out for comfort. True freedom is found only when you realize that the world cannot truly harm the man who has already decided to accept his own destruction as a necessary risk of creation. You are going to die anyway, regardless of how perfectly you managed your risk profile. The only question is whether you arrive at that final moment having actually lived, or having merely successfully managed your fear until the very end. So, ask yourself this one terminal question. When your life flashes before your eyes, will it be a magnificent, terrifying epic or a neatly filed, predictable memo? The choice is not about being happy or unhappy. The choice is always between living fully and dying safely. Join this community of thinkers who reject the sedative, who choose the weight of experience over the lightness of being untouched. Subscribe now and let's keep digging deeper into the uncomfortable truths together.